Hi, I'm VEERA Mahajan and reading Unreported again, continuing with the reading from yesterday. And today I want to read Doug's story. Like I said, domestic abuse is not just about women, it's about anybody who gets controlled and abused by another person. It could be a man, and most likely it's a woman, but there are some men who are also abused by some really strong, tough, abusive women. So here today we have the story of Doug. Doug, a successful businessman, was divorced from a wife who was always depressed and never paid attention to his needs. Although she was a constant complainer, she was not abusive. But Doug did not feel loved or cared for, so he made the decision to leave her and try to find love. He thought his first marriage was bad until he married his second wife. He had been single for many years and had dated a lot before he met his new wife. She was a little high-strung, but she was very intelligent and incredibly book-smart. By then, he was also tired of dating. He decided that she was his match. He could not have been more wrong. Can you relate? Doug never liked confrontations because he usually ended up taking abuse from others. If someone yelled, he would walk away instead of standing up to them. This is exactly what he did in the relationship. Even though his wife was mean-spirited, he kept going back. After all, he thought he loved her, but he would often shut down completely and did not talk when she got angry with him. And that just made her angrier. When she screamed at him, he felt that there was nowhere to go. He believed that the only way to stop her shouting and yelling was to keep quiet. During our interview, he told me the only time that I can remember being happy was when I had lung cancer. The 2 weeks after his surgery was the happiest time in his marriage. During this period, she was kind to him, he sadly told me. Other than that, this one time, I would be happy if she had been happy for 2 days in a row. After he recovered from surgery, the abuse returned. He found himself spending time in the basement with the cat. This became his sanctuary. He questioned himself if he was actually being abused. He knew the answer but did not want to admit it. But anyone else, all his friends, his family, and his kids confirmed what he already knew. Doug was the victim of domestic abuse. Domestic abuse is a universal epidemic and can hit anyone. It does not discriminate, but it can be stopped. As difficult as that may seem, if the abuser has no consequences, he has no motivation to stop. Ultimately, the responsibility lies with the victim. He or she has to stop accepting the abuse. No one can continue to abuse you if you don't let them. The only sure way to put an end to abuse is to stop accepting it. Have you finally had enough? Liza was afraid of her husband and hesitant to go on a cruise with him. She was recovering from a major surgery from fibroids caused by stress. Her doctors told her to try to reduce her stress since it made her fibroids get worse. She wondered how she could reduce her stress if it was all she had. She reluctantly gave in to her husband's insistence and went on a cruise with him. She knew he was going to spend most of the time in the casino and that she was going to feel neglected. He promised not to spend too much time in the casino, but after the first day, he would take her to the room after dinner and then would go alone to the casino. This continued for the remainder of the trip. One day, a gentleman from the next table said to her husband, "I know she's your wife, but if you're going to the casino without her, could I show her around?" Liza was terrified that her husband would react angrily to this and blow up at the man, or worse, Liza was equally afraid that he would consent and allow the man to escort her. This would humiliate her more than the blow-up. So, to avoid all that, she quickly excused herself and went to the cabin alone. Can you imagine how hopeless Liza must have felt at the hands of her bullying and gambling husband? After this 10-day cruise, their 18-year-old son, who was a freshman in college, was waiting for them. He had missed his mother and father and wanted to see them as soon as they came home. Liza immediately began to make some sandwiches for him while telling him about the trip. Her husband interrupted her, asking their son about his classes and grades. He did not get a satisfactory answer and started yelling. Within a few minutes, while she was still working on the sandwiches, she heard yelling and screaming from the next room. She went there to see what was happening and saw her husband hitting her son in the face with a shoe. He was crying and begging his father to stop. There was blood on his t-shirt. She started crying, begging her husband to stop. He stopped hitting his son, but began shouting at Liza for encouraging his son to be disrespectful to his father. She could not believe that within 5 minutes of their coming home, after 10 days away, there was already crying, yelling, fighting, and bleeding. Finally, Liza hit her breaking point. Finally. That day, for the first time in 23 years, she said to her husband, "I can't take this anymore." The image of the shoe on her grown son's face was etched in her brain. At that point, she knew she would not let this man damage their son's self-esteem any longer. Begging and crying had not stopped him. She had to take a stand. She took her first small, brave step. For the first time in over 20 years, Liza moved to a separate bedroom. She could not leave when the kids were younger because he had threatened that if she tried to leave, he was going to do everything in his power to take their kids away from her. She believed him, for she knew his temper and his need to always win. She knew that he would follow through with his threats. She knew that he would make her suffer and that he would give her a hard time in a custody fight. As a result, she stayed, and by staying, she learned to deny, ignore, and accept a lot more of abuse. Her friends pointed out how angry her husband got at the smallest things. As hard as it was to survive those horrible days of yelling and beating, she would try to remember the good times and wait for the bad times to pass. She did everything she could to stay positive and happy until her children had turned 18 and passed the custody stage. While waiting for that, she hoped that things would get better. She did not want to go through divorce, but as you can imagine, things got worse. And so she waited years of misery until her children were of age. Was it worth it? Liza isn't sure. If you are a victim, you feel bad about yourself for taking it and letting the abuser bully you. He takes advantage of your goodness. He feels entitled. You keep trying because you want to be good. You think that one day he will see that he is wrong and will realize how he is hurting you. You wait for him to stop. You think you will win him over with your love. You get a rare good day, so you keep giving in, but nothing is ever going to be enough for him. He might throw some crumbs your way to keep you wanting. That is how he controls you. Remember, you're the other adult in the relationship. It is your responsibility to save yourself and your children. The bully never gets better unless he actually admits that he has a problem and gets professional help. Most bullies don't stop bullying you until you walk out and thus put a stop to it. A lot of women die trying to change the bully. You can't put a stop to it until you believe you deserve better. You deserve to be happy all the time, not once in a while. You deserve to be treated and respected with care and love all the time, not only when he feels like it. Liza knew she was not happy, but she did not realize the extent of damage the abuse was doing to her children. Trapped in a typical victim syndrome, she denied that her marriage was abusive. Denial is one of the tools in a survival kit of abuse victims. If the victim can deny that the abuse exists, or if she can at least deny the extent of the abuse, she can trick herself into believing everything is okay or will be okay, when in fact nothing is okay. This holds true for male victims too. For them, it is especially difficult to acknowledge to themselves or to anyone else that they are allowing someone to bully them. Both sexes can fall into the pattern of abuse. The victims actually enabled the abusers to continue their abuse.